but I won't do that.
Hello there, I'm Lloyd Evans and you're watching the John Cedars channel from The Bunker, and this video represents the final installment in my series of rebuttals to the 2019 Love Never Fails Convention of Jehovah's Witnesses. If you've seen my thoughts on this 3-day convention, namely my videos on the material that gets shown on the Friday, Saturday and Sunday, hopefully you'll agree that there's some fairly messed up material that is shown to witnesses with the aim of manipulating them and influencing their thinking. And I'm afraid that along those lines, I've pretty much saved the best, or should I say the worst, for last. We're now going to watch parts 1 and 2 of the Bible drama, The Story of Josiah, Love Jehovah, Hate What Is Bad. This is a drama that gets shown to witnesses, again in 2 parts, on the Saturday and Sunday. And in my opinion, it showcases the very worst of what Jehovah's Witness beliefs, theology and culture is all about. So with all that out of the way, let's not waste any more time. Without further ado, let's roll the first clip.
Grandpa, what is this?
Where did you find this?
In the fields.
Come along. I need to show you something. I never told you about my past, have I? Josiah, you're still young now. But one day you'll learn more about my life. I did many bad things. I used to worship false gods instead of Jehovah. I even brought idols into the temple. I upset Jehovah very much. And he disciplined me. I begged Jehovah to forgive me.
Did he forgive you?
Yes, his mercy is great.
So perhaps one of the most intriguing things about this drama is the depiction of King Manasseh. King Manasseh here is depicted as kind of a wise old sage, a benevolent guru sort of Obi-Wan Kenobi character. Yes, he alludes here to having done a few wrong things, but mostly he's one of the good guys in this depiction of the events of the life of King Josiah. Now, those of you who can remember the Hezekiah drama that was shown in the 2016 Remain Loyal to Jehovah convention will remember the whole story of the siege of Jerusalem and how Hezekiah staved it off and remained loyal to Jehovah against all odds. Manasseh is supposed to have been Hezekiah's son, so that's where we are in the timeline. With a father like Hezekiah, as depicted in the Hezekiah drama, you would expect Manasseh to be more or less a well-rounded individual. He certainly wasn't, and when he says, "I did a few bad things," the worst of which involved bringing idols into the temple, we'll be the judge of that, thank you. If you go to the Insight volumes, Insight Volume 2, page 307, there's a summary there of King Manasseh, and it says, "He did what was bad in Jehovah's eyes, rebuilding the high places his father had destroyed." That's important to remember as this film continues. "Setting up altars to Baal, worshipping all the army of the heavens, and building false religious altars in 2 temple courtyards. He made his sons pass through the fire, practiced magic, employed divination, and promoted spiritistic practices." Manasseh also put the graven image of the sacred pole he had made into the house of Jehovah. So when Manasseh's taking us through his rap sheet in these opening sequences of the Josiah drama, he's leaving out quite an important piece of his past. He burnt his kids. But intriguingly, the writers omit that detail because they seem to have reached this decision that for this story to work, Manasseh needs to have been a basically good guy who made a few mistakes. But as we're going to learn, there is no limit when it comes to the amount of mistakes you can be forgiven for.
Now, these are the words of Jehovah's prophet Isaiah. All who form carved images amount to nothing, and their cherished objects will be of no benefit. As their witnesses, they see nothing and know nothing. Now, I want you to read these words down here about a man who cuts down a tree. Let's see what he does with it.
Half of it he burns up in a fire. With that half, he roasts the meat that he eats, and he is satisfied. He also warms himself and says, "Ah, I am warm," as I watch the fire. Is that bad, Grandpa?
No, my son, but let's see what he does with the other half.
But the rest of it he makes into a god, into his carved image. He bows down to it and worships it. He prays to it and says, "Save me, for you are my God." That's wrong.
Why is it wrong, Josiah?
Because it's not Jehovah. It's just a tree.
How does Jehovah feel about doing something like that?
Jehovah doesn't want us to serve any other gods?
Right. Besides, can any other God listen to our prayers?
No, only Jehovah.
And Jehovah wants to hear your prayers, Josiah.
I always pray to him.
Pray to him many times a day from your heart. That shows you love him and want to be his friend. If you make a mistake, pray to Jehovah to forgive you.
Even for 100 mistakes?
Even for 100.
1,000?
Yes,
1,000,000?
even that many. If you pray to Jehovah to forgive you and you really keep trying to do what is right.
So wouldn't you know, it turns out that all of that praying and all of that repentance has left Manasseh with a remarkably clean conscience, given all of the things he's done. As I mentioned, we're talking about someone who, quite apart from the idolatry offences on his rap sheet, this is someone who apparently sat there and ordered his own children to be killed with fire. And this is something that you can just be sorry for, I guess, and get repentance. We're building a picture of the sort of organisation that can say of pedophiles, well, as long as they're sorry, they're just reproved. And whoever their victims are who are in the same congregation, they have to sit alongside these ones and treat them as though this individual is their brother or sister, as though everything's fine, as though everything's forgotten. But what's also interesting for me is that King Manasseh's clean conscience covers over yet more sins, apparently, that are also alluded to in the Insight volume. If you look at the end of that first paragraph that deals with King Manasseh, it says, "Though Jehovah sent prophets, these were not heeded. Manasseh was also guilty of shedding innocent blood in great quantity, which, according to the literature of the Jewish rabbis, included that of Isaiah, who they say was sawed apart at Manasseh's command. Can you remember what scroll Manasseh is here reading from?
Now, these are the words of Jehovah's prophet Isaiah.
I mean, how is that conversation supposed to go? Hey, young Josiah, come along. I've got a scroll I want to read to you. I actually knew the author very well. Both parts of him. We've barely begun this drama, and already I'm finding it difficult to keep up with the narrative that the writers are insisting on. We're supposed to believe that someone who's capable of murdering his own children by burning them, of murdering lots of people apparently, especially if they're prophets, of having people sawn in two, of reading from the scrolls of people he's had sawn in two as though it's nothing. This kind of individual who's capable of this kind of evil is someone who is A, capable of redeeming himself, and B, is in a position to pass on lessons on morality to the next generation.
Finish telling me a story.
Where was I?
The angel.
Right. Then, Jehovah's angel came down and he destroyed 185,000 of Sennacherib's troops.
Really?
Yes. King Hezekiah learned that we can always trust in Jehovah.
I like going to the temple with you.
Zephaniah? You shouldn't fill the boy's head with such stories.
The king told me to take Josiah to...
I know where you're going. And I don't care what my father told you. The boy isn't...
Isn't what?
Father, what are you doing out of bed?
Josiah wanted to go to the temple. I had Zephaniah take him along ahead of me. You may not want to join us, but you will not prevent Josiah from going.
As you wish.
This scene, which is still very early on in the film, I found very disturbing. There seems to be a message here when it comes to unbelieving parents and what rights they do or don't have in deciding on how their children worship. Josiah apparently expresses a desire to go to the temple to his grandfather, King Manasseh. Manasseh says, yeah, you go along ahead with Zephaniah to accompany you, and I will be along with you shortly. And Ammon encounters his son being led to the temple and objects and says, no, you're coming with me. Now, regardless of what you think about whether it's a good idea or a bad idea for young Josiah to go to the temple at that moment, you can't deny that it's the right of Josiah's father to decide on that matter, and it's not the right of Josiah's grandfather. Since when did parents have no say in this sort of situation? For me, this is Watchtower sneaking in a message fairly blatantly, not even trying that hard to disguise it, that if children want to go to the Kingdom Hall, or children want to go to a convention, no one should be able to stop them, not even their parents. And you can only imagine what sort of turmoil and chaos and tension this is going to cause in Jehovah's Witness families where the parents aren't believers but the grandparents are. Or where only one parent is a believer and they want to take their child to the convention or meeting and the unbelieving parent doesn't. Think of the turmoil that this sort of message is going to have in that kind of scenario.
The sacrifices and celebrations at the temple, they help us be friends with Jehovah. I tried to restore pure worship, but the people still sacrifice on the high places. Jehovah's temple. We've neglected it. How happy the people were when they worshiped Jehovah the right way. Jehovah's temple and worship can be like that again. Look at me. Serve Jehovah, Josiah. All other gods are powerless.
So we've just witnessed the scene where Manasseh dies, and again, I'm having a really hard time reconciling the character of Manasseh in this drama with the individual we are introduced to in the Insight volume. Manasseh there says, "I tried to restore pure worship, but the people still sacrifice on the high places." Again, if you go to the Insight volume, it says, "He did what was bad in Jehovah's eyes, rebuilding the high places his father had destroyed," again, his father being Hezekiah, "setting up altars to Baal, worshipping all the armies of the heavens, and building false religious altars in 2 temple courtyards." Manasseh is the one, apparently, who is responsible for the proliferation of worship of Baal in Judah, and yet the character that Watchtower has created of Manasseh is giving us the impression that, oh, it was actually earlier kings who started all this, and I tried to fix it, but I failed. No, you didn't try to fix it, you caused it, at least according to, again, this summary in the Insight book. I can't understand the motive of the writers in making Manasseh a completely different individual to the Manasseh described in the Bible and indeed in Watchtower's own publications. I can only assume that there's this underlying message that anyone is capable of redemption, provided you say the right things later on, provided you're willing to make a deathbed proclamation of your faith in God. All of these terrible things can just be completely forgotten, and in fact, history itself can be rewritten.
How happy the people were when they worshiped Jehovah the right way. Jehovah's temple and worship can be like that again.
Josiah!
I found this scene interesting in the context of Watchtower's constant emphasis on building and construction. If you keep on top of the JW Broadcasting episodes, or indeed any number of the videos that Watchtower churns out as part of its steady stream of propaganda, it's very obvious that here is an organisation that is obsessed with building things, obsessed with telling young people to essentially help Watchtower expand its property portfolio. You could argue that there's no hidden message here because Josiah, at least according to the Bible narrative, did indeed play a role in renovating Solomon's temple. But for me, just the feel of this scene points strongly in the direction of buildings carrying significance, property and construction carrying some kind of significance, and all of these material things being things that will bring God pleasure.
How's business?
The Phoenician models are beautiful, and they're selling briskly by Matin.
Excellent. We're making a bigger profit on them, too. They will bring blessings from Baal. I can see the crops flourishing already.
Jehovah doesn't like this.
Stop it! We need the help of all the gods, not just Jehovah.
That's not what grandfather taught me. He said all other gods are powerless.
Lower your voice. Your grandfather knew Topheth better than anyone. You, my son, can become a mighty man with Jehovah's help. And Baal's.
That's not right. That's not right. If we're going to worship Jehovah, then we need to go to the temple. Grandfather said
Never mind what your grandfather said! He's been dead for 2 years. You are not to speak of him again, understand?
Zephaniah!
So I've included this clip for you mostly so you can follow the narrative of the story. Manasseh is obviously dead. His son Ammon, Josiah's father, is now king. And Ammon is showing his true colours in this scene by jumping to the defence of the Baal worshippers, whose presence is obvious in the marketplace because of all of the idols that are being sold. Josiah doesn't like the idols. He's sticking very firmly to the ideology laid down by the alternative Manasseh that Watchtower has created in this drama, and he's making it known that when he's finally king, he won't stand for any of this idolatry in Judah. But it's interesting to see how Ammon's character is being dealt with here by the writers. He goes from appealing to his son, apparently in a very kind of kind and conciliatory way, to just turning on him and shouting at him and being very unreasonable. Watchtower needs Ammon to be conspicuously unreasonable, even though, according to the Bible itself, Ammon was supposed to have been just as bad as Manasseh was. 2 Kings 21 Verse 20 says that Ammon continued to do what was bad in Jehovah's eyes, just as his father Manasseh had done. He kept walking in all the ways that his father walked, and he continued serving and bowing down to the disgusting idols that his father had served. Just as his father Manasseh had done. So no huge difference, apparently, between Manasseh and Ammon. But again, the writers have their agenda, they have their narrative that they need to force through. They need to contrast Josiah with someone, so Ammon ends up being the bad guy or the bad king who needs to give way so that Josiah can start his work of cleansing Judah of idolatry.
Well, if this year Baal gives us no rain, we will certainly know why. What the boy did today was blasphemous.
What do you expect? He spent all of his time with my father.
He must be punished.
Hold your tongue if you want to keep it! You may be a priest of Baal, but do not forget who's king here.
I most certainly will not.
Good. Now go. And take that with you.
No. It will remain here for you to reflect upon, my lord the king.
So, we've just witnessed the assassination of a king of Judah, and bear in mind that this video, this drama, is being shown at conventions of Jehovah's Witnesses all over the world as required viewing, and there will be children present. So children are going along, and bear in mind, I am no prude, I have no objection to this sort of scene being included in a video that's for a mature audience, for adults or for older children. Anyone who's been to a Jehovah's Witness convention knows that it's crawling with children, and why wouldn't it be? Because Jehovah's Witness parents are urged to bring along their young ones as part of their indoctrination. Children of Jehovah's Witnesses accompany their parents both to the Kingdom Hall meetings and to conventions like this. And in my view, it's entirely inappropriate for children of all ages to have to sit through that sort of scene. I wouldn't be comfortable with my 5-year-old daughter, Jessica, sitting through a scene like this. I think she would find it very disturbing. It would probably give her nightmares, and we would have to have all sorts of conversations with her about what death is and about how there are bad people who do bad things to each other. How ironic that me and my wife, as apostates, are more mindful of the need to show age-appropriate material to children than Jehovah's organization is.
Long live the king!
Long live the king! Long live the king! Long live the king! Long live the king! Long live the king! Long live the king! Long live the king!
Amen. My lord, the king.
Zephaniah, prophet of Jehovah, so good to see you too. My king, I know you must feel so overwhelmed by all this. I will truly miss your father. He was a good, tolerant man who allowed everyone to worship as they wished. You know, your father consulted with me regularly on very important matters.
Josiah? Can we still shoot arrows sometimes? Maybe.
We'll leave you, my lord. Again, my sincerest condolences for the loss of your father. I'm here whenever you need me.
So, Josiah is now king, and we have this scene in the royal court that seems to be put there to remind us of how conspiring and manipulative Ben Matten is. Ben Matten is the head priest of Baal, who we saw in the previous scene being heavily involved in the murder of Josiah's father. Interestingly, the Bible says very little about Ammon's murder, and so it seems Ben Matten is just an entirely fictional character that Watchtower has created, again, to pursue this narrative of showing so-called apostates as wicked and devious. In fact, in 2 Kings 21:23, it just simply says, "Eventually Ammon's servants conspired against him and put the king to death in his own house." That's all the Bible has to say about the assassination of Ammon. So Ben Matten is an entirely fictional character as far as we can tell, but he plays an integral role in this drama of, again, showing apostates as being wicked and devious.
Enan, I'd almost given up on you. We're almost done.
Enan, let's see who can hit center first.
There's no contest. You have more time to practice.
I have to practice, so I can defeat Jehovah's enemies.
So we've moved forward in time now. Anan and Josiah are no longer children, but they are, I don't know, young men. And we see there a very interesting scene where Josiah fires an arrow and hits a bullseye, saying that he needs to defeat Jehovah's enemies. A very clear, unambiguous message, again, fairly early on in the film, of what's to come. Namely, the fact that there will be no toleration of any other religion other than the religion that is approved by Jehovah and Jehovah's appointed king.
Do you understand what kind of influence a king has?
I think so. My grandfather was a great man.
My father says that King Manasseh may have been a little brutal, but he was effective and he was tolerant. He gave the people many freedoms.
Enan, having freedom means having responsibility. The responsibility...
Here we go again.
The responsibility to choose who we will serve, Jehovah or other gods.
My father says that after the Assyrians released Manasseh, worshipping only one god weakened him. And he started ruling like an old woman.
That's not true. My grandfather learned the hard way that Jehovah is the only true God, and you just insulted him.
My father simply sees the mistakes your grandfather made.
Your father should keep his views to himself.
How can you say that? Your father trusted him, and you should too. Besides, you can be loyal to Jehovah and to Baal, Malcolm, or any other god at the same time.
You don't honestly believe that?
I do. Huh.
Your father keeps confusing people.
So, are you telling me I should disrespect him? What about the proverb that says, listen to your father who caused your birth?
Enan, we must respect our parents. But all of us, including our parents, owe our lives to Jehovah. If we just go along with our parents in doing something Jehovah hates, aren't we honoring them more than Jehovah?
So for me, there are two messages in this scene. First of all, a message about apostates. Ben Matan is the ultimate apostate in this narrative. He is Anan's father. He is the head priest of Baal. And he's described there as confusing people. He's described there as someone who ought to keep his views to himself. So as far as I'm concerned, he's the big bad apostate in this narrative, and his son ought to ignore him. And this brings me to the second point of this scene, which is the very clear message that Jehovah comes first, parents come second. So if your parents are saying anything that doesn't fall in line with what Jehovah would want, you are to disregard them. We see a very clear application in the way Jehovah's Witnesses do things with their shunning policy. Family relationships mean nothing when it comes to following through with the disfellowshipping decision. And there are any number of children out there who are now having nothing to do with their parents because their parents have fallen away or have stopped believing, but the children, because they've been sufficiently indoctrinated, are under the impression that they need to keep their parents entirely out of their lives, because to pursue a relationship with a disfellowshipped parent would be an act of disloyalty to Jehovah.
Be careful what you say around Josiah. His over-righteous spirit may one day turn dangerous. You need to help him be more balanced, reasonable.
How? Zephaniah says he has a spirit like David.
Unfaithful David, who stole another man's wife. What is it? Talk to me.
What if Josiah's right?
Right about what?
What if there really is only one true God?
Son, Josiah doesn't see the bigger picture. His grandfather did before he weakened.
What can I do?
Talk to him. Help him to be a good king. Tolerant, like Manasseh was. Here's what you can tell him.
So in this scene, we're introduced to more of Ben Matten's scheming as he tries to recruit Anan in leading Josiah astray. Again, the very clear message that Watchtower intends here is to portray apostates as manipulative, as scheming, as evil and nefarious, working in the shadows, trying to drive home their agenda. I hope you notice, though, in this context, that Ben Matten refers to tolerance and the fact that in order to be a good king, Josiah needs to be more tolerant like his father. This, for me, is Watchtower manipulating witnesses to be essentially more intolerant, to associate tolerance with evil and scheming and with things that Satan's world, reasoning that Satan's world might employ as a means of watering down God's requirements and bringing in an anything goes sort of attitude. This is a recurring theme because the Baal worshippers, and Ben Matten in particular, are pursuing this idea of freedom of worship and tolerance of all religions.
I will truly miss your father. He was a good, tolerant man who allowed everyone to worship as they wished.
Whereas Josiah is pursuing the idea of only one religion to the exclusion of all other religions. And that's kind of ironic given the situation that Jehovah's Witnesses are in, where in country after country, particularly countries like Russia, they are appealing on the grounds of freedom of worship, on the grounds that freedom of conscience and freedom of belief is enshrined as it is in our basic human rights. Basically, Watchtower expects everyone else to be tolerant and accommodating of Jehovah's Witness beliefs, teachings, and policies, but as far as Jehovah's Witnesses themselves are concerned, they are to be intolerant of any beliefs, any religions that conflict with what the governing body are teaching them.
What are you drawing?
It's the temple. My grandfather told me how beautiful the temple was when people would worship Jehovah properly. He said it could be that way again. I'll tell you what I intend to do as king.
You don't understand. Josiah plans to tear down all the high places.
Well, I understand, all right. When his extremist ideas become the law of the land, there will no longer be any joy. No tolerance, no freedom of worship, only narrow-minded rules and oppressed people. Do you understand that? This is not a good sign.
This is an interesting scene. So Anan has discovered Josiah's ultimate plan of destroying all the high places. So it seems that Josiah isn't necessarily interested in killing people who aren't following the state religion or following Jehovah or Yahweh or however you want to describe it. He's more interested in making it harder for Baal worship to flourish by eliminating all of the high places or the places where Baal worshippers might congregate. This plan is going to become more extreme in the second part of the drama, as we're going to see. But Anan is alerted as to what Josiah's intentions are, and he goes back to his father Ben-Matan and lets Ben-Matan know about these intentions. And what Ben-Matan says is portrayed as being the ramblings of an evil, greedy, drunken man who's only looking out for his own interests. But it's worth just reading back what his line is when he learns of Josiah's plan. He says, when Josiah's extremist ideas...
When his extremist ideas become the law of the land, there will no longer be any joy. No tolerance, no freedom of worship.
Again, tolerance and freedom of worship are things that Watchtower relies on, principles that Watchtower relies on, enshrined in the United States Constitution, enshrined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, that Watchtower's lawyers repeatedly appeal to when fighting for the freedoms of Jehovah's Witnesses. And here in this drama, they're being portrayed in a negative light. Isn't that interesting? Anyway, when his extremist ideas become the law of the land, there will no longer be any joy, no tolerance, no freedom of worship, only narrow-minded rules and oppressed people.
Only narrow-minded rules and oppressed people.
And when you think about it, he's got a point, because it's one thing to have religious beliefs that you hold dear, to have strong convictions about God, to have what you consider to be a close relationship with God based on your understanding of divine revelation, be it through the Bible or some other sacred text. It's another thing entirely to impose those beliefs at gunpoint, or in this case at sword point, on everyone else, and make it, as Ben-Matan says, the state religion, when his extremist ideas become the law of the land. That's why secularism, or the separation of religion and government, is so important. Because only when you have that separation can there be true freedom, where everyone is free to have their own beliefs, including Jehovah's Witness beliefs. This works to the favour of Watchtower. This works to the favour of Jehovah's Witnesses, when you have an arrangement where people can pretty much believe what they want. But as this drama unfolds, we're going to understand what the governing body's sick fantasy is. They crave a scenario where they get to dictate what everyone's beliefs are, not just 8.5 million Jehovah's Witnesses, but the inhabitants of the globe. And this fantasy is being played out on a smaller scale using the story of Josiah. But that's part one over with. We must now turn our attention to part two.
Jehovah is great and most worthy of
Praise.
very good. Worthy of praise in the city of our God in his holy mountain. Beautiful in its loftiness, the joy of the whole earth is Mount... Who can tell me?
Mount Zion.
Both of you have been paying good attention. Now, where is Mount Zion?
Right here, Father. Right here.
Where? I don't see it. Are you sure?
No, Father. We live on Mount Zion.
Are you saying we live on a mountain?
Yes.
What is so special about Mount Zion?
I know.
Tell me, my dear.
This is where King David lived. Jehovah said, I have put my king upon Zion, my holy mountain. The priests brought the ark here.
Amuro, where did we get such studious children?
Just like their father.
So Josiah is now married and has 2 children, and this scene is very clearly showing us what Watchtower's expectations are for Jehovah's Witness parents. They are to use every opportunity to indoctrinate their children. What we're seeing here is a depiction of what Jehovah's Witnesses would call a family worship session. Family worship sessions are to be held with children on a weekly basis, and again the objective is to indoctrinate children into the Jehovah's Witness faith, which, when you think about it, is a very clear example of exploitation. Children are just going to believe whatever their parents tell them, whether it's true or not. They're just going to trust that their parents wouldn't lie to them. This is how all religions flourish, through this process. Nobody stops to ask the question, hang on, is it right to actually do this when we ourselves aren't 100% sure that this is true? Because if we're being honest, we only believe it because this is what our parents told us. So it's really a vicious cycle, but it's a cycle that Watchtower very much depends on to keep the numbers buoyant, especially when you look at how the preaching work globally is really struggling to bring in new converts.
Zephaniah, today my little son found this in a field and brought it home.
They're filling the holy city with their filthy idols.
Everywhere I look, I see Baal images. Smoke on the high places. The smell of their incense makes me sick. I've been king for 12 years now. It's time to act. I want to finish the cleansing work my grandfather started.
You will need Jehovah's help.
I know. I've been praying about it day and night.
Good.
I will issue a proclamation. Let the word go forth that we will rid this land of idolatry.
I've seen these cheaper.
Take it or leave it.
You keep raising your prices.
We start here.
This is what we will do to every false god in the land.
So now things are starting to get serious, and Josiah's agenda of cleansing the land of Judah of false worship is now underway, albeit on a fairly limited scale. So far he's just busting statues and not actual people. But isn't it interesting how he referred earlier to Manasseh again? I hate to keep harping on about it, but I just don't know how the writers can just completely rewrite who Manasseh was if they're trying to give an accurate depiction of a Bible account, because all Jehovah's Witnesses need to do is go to the Insight volumes and see that Manasseh wasn't involved in cleansing Judah of false religion. He introduced false religion following the reign of his father Hezekiah. But I want you to dwell on what we've just seen. We've just seen King Josiah with soldiers enter into a marketplace where people are trading. No one, as far as we can see, is being coerced into buying these false images. As far as we can tell, there's absolutely nothing nefarious going on, aside from arguably these statues being overpriced. And yet the king, the head of state, is intervening with soldiers to end the trade in these idols. If you're a Jehovah's Witness, I want you to just stop for a moment and compare this scene with the scenes that are repeatedly shown to Jehovah's Witnesses, including at this very convention, depicting the Russian authorities interfering with worship at Kingdom Halls. So that you have police officers breaching the gates and fences of Kingdom Halls and entering Kingdom Halls and disrupting peaceful gatherings of Jehovah's Witnesses, so that the Russian government is effectively dictating what people's beliefs should be. Again, I would submit that it's very hypocritical of Watchtower to bemoan their treatment in countries like Russia, where the authorities are dictating people's worship, are interfering in this very private aspect of people's lives, while at the same time fantasizing in this Josiah drama of a state of affairs where worship of Jehovah is the state religion and is enforced to the extent where images get smashed up with hammers. This seems to me to be a very obvious example of Watchtower wanting it both ways.
He's a fool. Baal will rescue us.
Baal will rescue us? Father, look around. All over Judah and Jerusalem, Josiah is destroying Baal images. They can't even rescue themselves. And the people are supporting him.
Go ahead and doubt, you disrespectful child. You have become disloyal to Baal and to me, your father who gave you life. Never mind. I'll come up with a plan. My Lady Hamutal, a word with you, please.
A word with you, please!
Ben Matten? What do you want?
Please. Tell the king he must stop what he's doing. This is madness. He's endangering himself, his family, and our entire nation. Josiah's campaign against Baal worshippers was a campaign against Baal himself.
Oh, Ben Matten, you hear disgusting idols. Get away from me before I have the guards arrest you.
Forgive me. I beg you. Just another word. Please. Hamutal, I'm only telling you this for your own safety. It'd be terrible if something were to happen to the king. Like what happened to his father. Hamutal, think of your children.
Let's be honest here, folks. Ben Matten is just our quintessential apostate stereotype. That's the purpose of his character in this drama, to portray what apostates are like. They skulk around the streets wearing cloaks, trying to conceal their identity. They threaten people. They're greedy, they're scheming, they're evildoers. This is the image of apostates that Watchtower wants witnesses to have. They're obviously not going to portray apostates as people who have simply stopped believing for conscientious reasons and therefore feel it is their duty to make information and resources available that give witnesses the benefit of having both sides of the argument at their disposal. Of course, Watchtower is going to portray apostates as the sort of people who would threaten children. That seems to me to be the objective of this scene. But if we also just go back a moment to that scene where Einan confronts Ben Matten, Ben Matten reacts by saying that Einan's doubts amount to disloyalty.
Go ahead and doubt, you disrespectful child. You have become disloyal to Baal and to me.
Because Anan is starting to doubt the merits of Baal worship, the merits of resisting Josiah's campaign, he is automatically disloyal. And I found that rather disingenuous, the way it's the apostates who take that attitude, when in truth we all know that that's precisely how Jehovah's Witnesses operate. If you start doubting the religion in any way, this is perceived as being an act of disloyalty. In other words, there can't be an honest reason why you would stop believing. It must be a problem with you. It must be that you are being disloyal and need to correct your behavior.
Please don't be fearful.
But this campaign has gone on for a year. How long do we have to endure this?
However long it takes. Yes.
My lord, Zephaniah the prophet has arrived. He brought someone with him.
Thank you. I'll see them in the throne room. Better check on the children. Please don't show your concern in front of them.
This is a scene that could only have been written by male writers. You have there Josiah's wife being fearful, being fretful. She needs her husband in order to have any ounce of courage in the face of Ben Matten's threats. And at the end there, it's a case of go check on the children. This is apparently what women do, is they check on children and they perform a motherly role all the time. They don't have any other purpose apparently in a family environment. So for me, this scene gives us yet another example of Watchtower writers allowing their own views of women to seep into the propaganda that they're producing. In this case, fairly overtly showing the fact that women are to be in subjection to their husbands and are apparently dependent on their husbands to ward off calamities and threats to the family.
My lord, this is Jeremiah from Anathoth.
The man whom Jehovah has called to be a prophet. Welcome.
King Josiah, all the faithful ones support your campaign against idolatry.
We have done as you directed, my lord. And since you began this campaign 18 months ago, you have gained many supporters.
This is true, yet many have continued worshiping Baal. Men like Ben Matten pose a great threat.
The people may even resort to violence to oppose this great work.
No doubt.
The people may even resort to violence to oppose this great work. I want you to remember those words. Violence is here being frowned on if it's violence against Josiah or against those who are implementing Josiah's campaign of religious cleansing. Apparently the mere suggestion of violence from the other side is something the audience ought to be concerned or alarmed about. But as we're going to see as this drama unfolds, Josiah and his followers have zero qualms about meting out violence on their opposers, even to the extent of killing those who don't fall in line with the state religion.
But Jehovah spoke to you directly, Jeremiah. How can I be sure that he'll back me up that way?
Jeremiah just told me of a prophecy given hundreds of years ago after King Jeroboam set up his own altar in the northern kingdom.
By the word of Jehovah, a man of God came from Judah to Bethel, while Jeroboam was standing by the altar to make sacrificial smoke. Then he called out against the altar by the word of Jehovah and said, "O altar, altar, this is what Jehovah says. Look, a son named Josiah will be born to the house of David, and he will sacrifice on you the priests of the high places, those making sacrificial smoke on you, and he will burn human bones on you. So do not waver in a lack of faith, Josiah. Become powerful by faith, like our father Abraham.
We have here a scene depicting Jeremiah reminding Josiah that there's actually a prophecy. He reads actually from 1 Kings 13 verse 2 onwards. There's a prophecy regarding someone who is a son named Josiah, who will carry out a specific action towards restoring pure worship. Now, all we have so far is a name, Josiah. Even if this were a genuine prophecy, it's hardly the most astounding prophecy because it's only giving us a name. And any number of people could have that name and take it upon themselves to carry out that action. To give you an example, it would be a little bit like me giving a prophecy that one day a son called Henry will be born, and this son called Henry will climb on the roof of the White House and take a pee on the roof of the White House. And then hundreds of years later, someone called Henry decides to take it upon themselves to fulfill that prophecy. In other words, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. So the prophecy itself, even if we're calling it a prophecy, sets a very low bar for fulfillment, especially if you factor in how many people are going to be born of the house of David, allowing any amount of time for multiple generations to stack up. At least one of those is bound to be named Josiah, and that individual can take it upon themselves to carry out to the letter the words that this prophecy insists that they act upon. But there's a scene coming up later which gives us even more insight into where not just this prophecy comes from, but indeed all of the early books of the Old Testament. And to be absolutely clear, I'm not super interested in destroying anyone's faith in the Bible. I lose no sleep if anyone wants to consider the Bible to be either a historical narrative or the Word of God. At the very least, I hope if you're watching this as a believer, you will understand why atheists like me, because I am now an atheist, I've left behind religion, why we struggle to take the Bible seriously as the infallible, inspired Word of God, even in cases like this, where there appears to be a prophecy that's been given, and this prophecy later seems to have been fulfilled.
Shafen, the cleansing campaign has gone well, but the temple is in disrepair. It has been neglected for decades.
I heartily agree, my lord.
Go up to Hilkiah the high priest. Let him collect all the silver that is brought into the house of Jehovah. Give it to those appointed over the work to repair the damage. Tell them to buy timbers and hewn stones.
Very good, my lord. And who should keep account of the funds? Shafen?
No, Joah. No accounting should be required for the silver. All of these men are trustworthy.
Yes, my lord. As you wish.
The day my grandfather died, he spoke of the temple. I kept this safe all these years, hoping one day I could glorify Jehovah's house. Today is that day.
For me, this whole scene is about Watchtower reminding witnesses of the need for building work, of the focus on construction. The Jehovah of Jehovah's Witnesses, the Yahweh of Jehovah's Witnesses, if you like, is a God who is obsessed with building things, whether it's kingdom halls, whether it's assembly halls, whether it's branch facilities, whether it's new headquarters for the religion. Jehovah needs buildings, apparently. And this scene is all about reminding witnesses of that, so that in future when Watchtower goes cap in hand saying we need extra funds to build this many kingdom halls or to build these new branch facilities, when those sorts of requests are made, witnesses will be thinking of scenes like this and thinking, well, in Josiah's time, buildings needed to be renovated and the people all came together and they found a way of funding the work, so we need to reach into our pockets and help Watchtower out, help out Jehovah's organization, because Jehovah needs buildings. And I've always struggled, even when I was a believer, with the concept of the God of the universe relying on buildings. There's even a verse I can think of, which many of you probably have already thought of, in Acts 17:24, where it says, "The God who made the world and all the things in it, being as he is Lord of heaven and earth, does not dwell in handmade temples." That always made sense to me, even though the very Bible that has those words, that contains those words, also describes Solomon's temple and big building projects that took place in the past. Regardless of the inconsistency, that particular logic always appealed to me. Why would God need buildings? It seems fairly obvious in hindsight that almost any man-made religion could invoke the supernatural, could invoke the need to worship God, to have buildings in which to worship God, as an excuse to amass a property portfolio that incidentally serves to enrich the leaders of that religion, or at least give them more power and prestige.
Hilkiah, what's wrong? Shaphan, I found the book of the law in the house of Jehovah.
The book of the law? I've never seen these passages before.
Take this scroll to King Josiah immediately.
My lord.
Shaphan, how's the renovation coming?
Your servants are doing everything that was assigned to them. They have poured out the money that was found in the house of Jehovah, and they have handed it over to the appointed men and to those doing the work.
Very well. Is there something else?
Yes, my lord. There is a book that Hilkiah the priest has given me.
What book?
They appear to be the words of Moses, my lord.
Read it to us then.
These are the regulations and the judicial decisions that you should be careful to carry out. You should completely destroy all the places where the nations you will dispossess have served their gods, whether on the high mountains or on the hills or under any luxuriant tree. You should pull down their altars, shatter their sacred pillars, burn their sacred poles in the fire, and cut down the graven images of their gods, obliterating their very names from that place.
Go, all of you along with Hilkiah. Inquire of Jehovah concerning the words of the book that has been found. For Jehovah's rage is great, because our forefathers did not carry out the word of Jehovah by observing all that is written in this book.
Okay, that was a slightly longer clip. I wanted you to see the whole thing unbroken, because this, for me, is a very significant scene. It's describing an event that has far more significance than I understood as a Jehovah's Witness. I only understand the significance of this event now that I've done more research. And if you're confused as to what I'm talking about, no, I don't think that what we've just seen happened as it is portrayed. I think that there was a scroll that was released, but whether this scroll had been discovered or not, I think there is grounds for disputing that. And before I go any further, I need to introduce you to a name, Israel Finkelstein. If you've watched my channel before, you'll know that I've spoken about Israel Finkelstein and an important book of his that I'm going to show you. But if you're a Jehovah's Witness watching this, just to give you some basis for listening to what I'm about to tell you, Israel Finkelstein is actually quoted in the Watchtower literature, and I need to credit my wife Deanna for discovering this, because she found this out by Googling the name. I didn't even know he'd been quoted by Watchtower, but he actually is quoted in this brochure, which, let's see, I don't know whether you can see it there. It's called A Satisfying Life, How to Attain It. It was actually published, let me see here, in 2001. And Israel Finkelstein appears on page 13, where it's talking about the discovery of an inscription about the House of David. This discovery was made in 1993. And in relation to this discovery, which confirms the existence of a David in the line of kings described in the Bible, Israel Finkelstein of Tel Aviv University is quoted as saying, "Biblical nihilism collapsed overnight with the discovery of the David inscription." So he's saying there, once we'd found this inscription, no one really had any basis for dismissing entirely the historical narrative of the Bible. But that doesn't mean that Israel Finkelstein is a champion of biblical literalism. So he doesn't say that everything that's described in the Bible actually happened in history. And you really need to check out, if you haven't done so already, and if this issue interests you, this book, The Bible Unearthed. It was published in 2002, actually a year after this brochure was printed or published. This was released, The Bible Unearthed, Archaeology's New Vision of Ancient Israel and the Origin of its Sacred Texts, by Israel Finkelstein and Neil Asher Silberman. So this takes us back to the quote-unquote discovery of the Law of Moses during temple renovations during the reign of Josiah, which we've just had depicted for us by Watchtower. What does Israel Finkelstein have to say about this book of the law? He actually has a lot to say about it, but these are the pertinent parts as far as I'm concerned. The discovery of the book of the law was an event of paramount significance to the subsequent history of the people of Israel. It was regarded as the definitive law code given by God to Moses at Sinai, whose observance would ensure the survival of the people of Israel. As early as the 18th century, biblical scholars noted the clear similarities between the description of the book of the law found in the temple and the book of Deuteronomy. The specific and direct parallels between the contents of Deuteronomy and the ideas expressed in the biblical account of Josiah's reform clearly suggest that both shared the same ideology. Deuteronomy is the only book of the Pentateuch that asserts it contains the words of the covenant that all Israel must follow. It is the only book that prohibits sacrifice outside the place which the Lord your God will choose. Now, if you're trying to figure out where all of this is going, let me skip to the end of that section where it says, to sum up, there is little doubt that an original version of Deuteronomy is the book of the law mentioned in 2 Kings. Rather than being an old book that was suddenly discovered, it seems safe to conclude that it was written in the 7th century BCE, just before or during Josiah's reign. Let's think about that for a moment, shall we? It makes total sense, if the Bible is man-made, that there would need to be an insertion point. If Moses really wrote the Pentateuch, or the first 5 books of the Bible, and bear in mind that one of those books describes his death, but if Moses really wrote those first 5 books, then there should be no need for any subsequent discovery of any one of those books. But if those books weren't written by Moses, if in fact they were written in a later period and ascribed to a Moses character who's described in those books, there would need to be an insertion point at which these books were miraculously found. Oh, look, you'll never guess what we found in a back room of the temple while we were ferreting around looking for bits of gold and silver. Look what we found in this jar. Wouldn't you know it? It's the actual law of Moses that we should have been following all along. And when you think about it, isn't that a little bit too convenient? Of course there would need to be a discovery like this if the whole thing was man-made, and if the Pentateuch was actually written centuries later than it purports to have been written, and not by Moses, but by a Judean king or people writing on behalf of a Judean king for the purpose of establishing his authority and providing some sort of historical narrative that supported his authority. It all makes total sense when you think about it. After all, who was Josiah if you strip away religion? If you take out of the equation entirely any claim to him being part of a divinely approved line of kings, who was he? He was just a king. And a king was just some guy who'd managed to kill a bunch of other guys to establish his authority, or whose father or grandfather had done such a thing, and because of his DNA, because he was the next in line, he got to sit on their throne and have the benefit of their achievements. That's all a king was. And it's difficult to respect someone purely on that basis. Only when you start introducing the divine, only when you start introducing religion, can you start to come up with reasons why a people should respect a king other than the fact that they made it to the top of a heap of bodies, essentially? That they've conquered enough people, assassinated enough predecessors to get to where they are today. Only when you say, actually, there's this Yahweh, and he passed on a whole bunch of laws to some guy named Moses, and those laws managed to find their way into a line of kings, and I'm the latest one in that line of kings, and I'm here to re-establish the pure worship going all the way back to Moses. It all starts to make sense now. And when I first heard about this and later read it, I was like, I can't believe I fell for it. I can't believe I genuinely thought that this was an actual history going all the way back to the Garden of Eden. All of these things happened. It makes total sense that rather than being an actual history, this was propaganda. If you can manipulate information, if you can manipulate events, if you can embellish history and make people believe a narrative that supports your authority, then you can control them. And just to be clear, I'm not asserting that all of the Old Testament originates from Josiah's time, but it is certainly at least likely. Let me read to you what Israel Finkelstein actually said. He said, "It is impossible to know if earlier versions of the history of Israel were composed in the time of Hezekiah or by dissident factions during the long reign of Manasseh, or if the great epic was composed entirely during Josiah's reign." In other words, it was kind of realistically one of those three options. Yet it is clear that many of the characters described in the Deuteronomistic history, Deuteronomistic history, such as the pious Joshua, David, and Hezekiah, and the apostate Ahaz and Manasseh, are portrayed as mirror images, positive and negative, of Josiah. The Deuteronomistic history was not history writing in the modern sense. It was a composition simultaneously ideological and theological. So that's why, as I alluded to earlier, there are people like myself who can no longer take the Bible seriously. And again, I have no interest in subverting anyone's faith. If you want to believe that everything that's described on every page of the Bible really happened, that's your call, and I'm not going to lose any sleep at all if you finish this video and say, hey, I'm going to believe that all of this happened just as it's written in the Bible. It doesn't make any difference to me. But at least by explaining all this, you will understand why there are people like myself who, when we listen to what archaeologists have to say and historians, we come to the conclusion that actually there's no point basing our lives around ancient propaganda that was written for the purpose of controlling people. We'd much rather move on from all that, because as this very video that we're watching demonstrates, by giving too much credence to these sacred texts and indeed invoking them to support the power of people in the here and now, of religious leaders who say, well, we are now the ones who God is speaking to. We're the successors of this legacy. It leads us down a very dark path, and we are going to see that very clearly in the scenes to follow.
This is what Jehovah, the God of Israel, says. Tell the man who sent you to me, I will bring calamity on this place and its inhabitants. All the curses that are written in the book that they read before the king of Judah. Because they have abandoned me and they're making sacrifices smoke to other gods in order to offend me, my rage will pour out on this place, and it will not be extinguished. King of Judah. This is what Jehovah, the God of Israel, says. Because your heart was responsive, and you humbled yourself before God on hearing his words, and ripped your garments apart, and wept before me, I also have heard you.
That is why you will be laid in your grave in peace, and your eyes will not see all the calamity that I will bring on this place.
Praise be Jehovah, our merciful God, for holding back his wrath. Summon all the elders of Judah and Jerusalem, have them come up to the house of Jehovah.
So back to the narrative, and this scene was interesting for me for two reasons. First of all, it depicts Huldah, the prophetess, who prophesies calamity upon Judah and its inhabitants, but who says that the king of Judah, who ripped his garments, well, he's going to be okay because he at least showed some kind of regret. Obviously, there's no room for any Huldahs, any prophetesses in Jehovah's organization today. For some reason, women only had a voice like this, only had a role to play in dispensing divine wisdom during the actual Bible events. For some reason, they're sidelined entirely, even though, according to Jehovah's Witness beliefs, women can be anointed, part of the 144,000 who rule in heaven with Jesus over the earth, as well as men, which creates this weird scenario where if you're a woman in a Jehovah's Witness congregation, you don't get a say in how that congregation is run, in the decisions that are made about the Kingdom Hall and the administration of the congregation, but you will have a say apparently in the future when you're ruling over the planet as a king priest with Jesus. It's all very odd, but at least in this narrative, in this portrayal, we finally see a woman who has a voice, who has some role in dispensing divine wisdom. But also just intriguing to see that Josiah is off the hook, so everything's okay. It doesn't matter that all of his subjects are basically screwed, that the future of Judah is bleak, that there will be calamity brought on Jerusalem and its inhabitants. No. So long as the king is okay, so long as he's gathered to his ancestors and laid in his grave in peace, well, there's cause for rejoicing. Praise be to Jehovah. It is all kind of reminiscent of the attitude in Jehovah's organization today, where the leaders take priority over everyone else, and as long as they're safe and as long as they're cocooned and protected from any legal ramifications, it really doesn't matter if witnesses in Russia are being persecuted. It doesn't matter if ordinary witnesses are suffering due to the abusive policies and teachings of the leaders. So long as the leaders are okay and they have freedom to continue in their roles, everything's fine. And this is clearly an organization that's being blessed by God.
Be careful to obey all these words that I am commanding you, so that it may always go well with you and your sons after you, because you are doing what is good and right in the eyes of Jehovah your God. When Jehovah your God annihilates the nations that you are to dispossess, do not ask about their gods, saying, "How are these nations accustomed to serve their gods?" Because they do for their gods every detestable thing that Jehovah hates, even burning their sons and their daughters in the fire to their gods. If your brother, or your son, or your daughter, or your cherished wife, or closest companion should try to entice you in secrecy, saying, "Let us go and serve other gods," you must not give in to him or listen to him, nor should you show pity or feel compassion or protect him. Instead, you should kill him
without fail.
Well, things really got real all of a sudden, and now we see where this is going. It started off with smashing a few statues in the marketplace and shutting down places of Baal worship, and now Josiah's true agenda is in full form, and we see that anyone who doesn't agree with him or his interpretation of what Jehovah requires for the nation, which conveniently has him at the top of the pyramid, supports his authority conveniently, anyone who doesn't fall in line is worthy of death. And I quoted earlier from Israel Finkelstein talking about how this law of Moses resembled very closely the book of Deuteronomy. You can actually read along word for word almost with what Josiah was just reading if you look up Deuteronomy 13 and read verses 6 to 9. So it begins, if your brother, the son of your mother, or your son or your daughter or your cherished wife, blah, 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 blah. And in verse 8 it says, you must not give in to him or listen to him, nor should you show pity or feel compassion or protect him. Instead, you should kill him without fail. He's reading Deuteronomy, which his followers have conveniently found in the temple. Again, how did I fall for this for so long? But we do well to ask the question, why is this being reenacted? What's in it for Watchtower? What could possibly be in it for the governing body, showing a scene where an impassioned speech is given, describing how mothers, sons, daughters, cherished wives, or closest companions should be treated appallingly, should be killed even, if they try to go after other gods? What's in it for Watchtower in having that kind of extreme rhetoric in a drama like this? I think we can see straight through it, can't we? This is the governing body acting out its fantasy of having the ability to kill people who don't follow their authority. And I call it a fantasy. This is even enshrined in the current theology, as I've mentioned in recent videos. The likes of Tony Morris, the likes of Stephen Lett, the likes of Mark Sanderson literally believe that they will have a hand in slaughtering those who don't recognize their authority in the very near future.
These will battle with the Lamb, but because he is Lord of Lords and King of Kings, the Lamb will conquer them. Also, those with him who are called and chosen and faithful will do so. Now, as good as our brothers are in audio video, I personally doubt anyone could do a videography and capture this event. You're talking about Christ Jesus, the 144,000 anointed, immortal spirit creatures, and then Jesus has the holy angels that are under his direction as king. This is going to be spectacular. All things are possible with God, but I think it'd have to have him to be able to show a video to capture what's coming in the future. Just spectacular.
They are Josiah in this context. They're the ones who get to go around not just smashing figurines, not just smashing temples, but smashing people for the crime of not following them. And as we're now seeing, this Josiah drama is really a depiction that gives life to their ultimate fantasy of a universe in which they are at the very top, and anyone who doesn't acknowledge their authority has been annihilated.
Please join me in making a covenant with the one true God, Jehovah, to carry out all the words of this book.
Jehovah, our God in the heavens. Amen.
Bring them down to the Kidron Valley and burn them there. And desecrate Topheth, so that no one can make their son or their daughter pass through the fire there. This is only the beginning.
This is only the beginning. You just wait until we're chasing down the apostates. We're chasing down the Baal worshippers and slaughtering them for having the wrong religion. It really is gruesome when you think about the message behind this and the fantasy that's being indulged here. Bottom line, this has been again created to give witnesses a hint at what the governing body expects, that gives us a disturbing insight into the level of fanaticism that the governing body has and how they would like things to be if they really did have power in the here and now. What we're seeing here is the governing body's fantasy of a caliphate.
With Jehovah's help, we will rid the entire land of high places. Every vestige of false worship, and of everyone who promotes it. Once we cleanse the land of Judah, we'll head north again, to the cities of Samaria.
ISIS claims to have destroyed priceless pieces of history. A video posted yesterday shows people taking power tools and sledgehammers to irreplaceable statues and artifacts in Iraq. One piece may date back all the way to 700 BC. Clarence Ward is in London with why the extremists say it had to be done.
I mean, really, what's the difference? One wants authority in the here and now, albeit ISIS seem to mostly have been dispersed. They don't seem to be as concentrated or as successful as they were maybe 2 years ago. They mostly seem to be on the run. But at least when they were at their zenith, their aims were to establish a caliphate in the here and now, where anyone who didn't recognize their theology, didn't recognize their divine authority, would be annihilated, and any trace of any kind of religion other than their extreme form of Islam was to be destroyed, even if it was a priceless artifact. The governing body kind of want power in the here and now, as evidenced by the fact that we're watching this. They love the idea, apparently, of chasing down apostates and smashing statues, but mostly they're content to outsource the killing to heaven at Armageddon, albeit they believe that they will have a role in that killing. They believe that they will be raptured so that they can personally involve themselves in hunting down people like me, or pretty much anyone who doesn't recognize their authority. Now, having said all that, if there is one mitigating factor in this dreadful drama which gives free rein to the governing body's ambitions, and is a very chilling insight into the end game of Jehovah's Witness theology. If there's one redeeming factor, it's how awful it is. I mean, come on. We're supposed to be intimidated by a bunch of guys in tunics and fake beards running around in fields, presumably somewhere in North America, pretending they're some kind of army. It's slightly reminiscent of the scenes from Monty Python and the Holy Grail, where they can't afford horses. So they're banging coconuts together. Watchtower apparently can't put their axes on horses, so Josiah's just racing around with his gang through the fields. I find that quite comical, but this is still deeply disturbing, inappropriate material that again gives us a chilling insight into the governing body's ambitions.
Father.
My lord the king is a pale imitation of his grandfather. And now he's turned my own son against me.
That is not true. This is about standing up for what is right. Baal is powerless. Why can't you see that?
Powerless. I wish I had sacrificed you in Topheth.
No one will ever be able to do that again. Josiah made sure of that.
So the orgy of jihad and murder and desecration continues. But this scene for me is disturbing for another reason, and that's the underlying message regarding shunning and the way witnesses are to think of disfellowshipped ones. Here, Ben Matan is again the apostate, the one who's been sentenced to disfellowshipping, and he has this dialogue with Anan, his son, which is supposed to be symbolic of the dialogue that a believing Jehovah's Witness might have with their disfellowshipped relatives, their disfellowshipped father, mother, son or daughter. And witnesses are here supposed to believe that if they were to have that conversation, it would be revealed that their disfellowshipped family member was evil, was actually wanting their destruction all along. We hear there Ben Matan say, I should have burned you as a sacrifice. I should have killed you while I had the opportunity. And the governing body is here essentially telling witnesses, this is the sort of thing your disfellowshipped loved ones would say to you to your face if you were to even have a conversation with them. So it's just as well that you're cutting off communication. At least that way you're sparing yourself the heartache of seeing the monster that your loved one has become.
My lord, everything has finally been accomplished according to the law.
There is one thing left for us to make right. Command the people to hold a Passover to Jehovah, as is written in the Book of the Covenant.
What if the people can't afford the Passover sacrifices?
I will contribute cattle to the people and my own flocks.
With great pleasure. The Passover has not been held in grand style since the days of the judges.
So let's just pause it there, because this character in particular, this actor, looked very familiar to me when I was first watching the Josiah drama. And then it dawned on me where I'd seen this guy before. I'm going to play you a clip from an elder training video that dates back to 2014.
Sometimes I feel so worn out, I don't want to go on anymore. I really don't. I've even had thoughts of turning the car on in the garage and just going to sleep inside.
Thank you for feeling comfortable enough to tell us that. It is not unusual for intense grief to cause bouts of depression and even some irrational thoughts. You know who you remind me of, Mary? You remind me of Job of old. Satan tries to capitalize on tragic events to cause a lover of Jehovah to falter spiritually. God's word is alive and in effect adapts to our changing circumstances with a word behind us saying, this is the way, Mary. Walk in it with his people.
I'd like to give you an assignment. Will you agree to memorize those 2 verses? Then, when you're overwhelmed, repeat the verses to yourself, even doing so out loud. It might have a calming effect on you.
I'll do that and give it a try. Oh, I'm sorry. I must be losing my mind. I meant to set out some cookies to go with your coffee.
So yes, that's where we've seen that actor before. Those of you who follow my channel and who are aware of some of my older content, probably you made the connection as well. It's the same guy who Watchtower shows as a role model in how to counsel a suicidal woman, and apparently the way to do it is not to suggest the intervention of a mental health professional urgently, because the woman in question actually had a very well thought out plan for how she was going to do it. No. We'll read scriptures to her, tell her to repeat certain scriptures as a mantra, and if she says, oh, where are my manners? I forgot to get the cookies, we'll take that as a sign that it's a job well done. So just astonishing material. Again, check out my rebuttal to that video if you haven't done so already. But going back to the Josiah drama, it's again fairly obvious that what we're watching here is not true worship being restored, but true worship being established. Let's all go back to celebrating the Passover, a tradition that conveniently no one is old enough to remember celebrating to begin with.
Careful to obey all these words that I am commanding you, so that it may always go well with you and your sons after you. Because you are doing what is good and right
in the eyes of Jehovah your God.
So that brings us to the end of the Josiah drama, and just a word on that last verse that's shown there on the screen about there being no king like Josiah prior to him or anyone rising up after him. That scripture is actually quoted by Israel Finkelstein at the beginning of chapter 11 of his book, and again, I would really recommend this book to anyone who's genuinely interested in the authenticity of the Bible, and particularly the history of the Bible, or the history that's laid out in the Bible from an archaeological aspect. This really goes into detail, and I think it's safe for you to buy this book for a believing Jehovah's Witness relative, because you can cite the fact that Israel Finkelstein has been quoted in the publications. So little tip for you there, little pro tip. But Israel Finkelstein actually quotes there the verse from 2 Kings, and I'll give you the context because it again adds a different perspective to what we've just seen. It is not just that King Josiah is seen in the Bible as a noble successor to Moses, Joshua, and David. The very outlines of those great characters as they appear in the biblical narrative seem to be drawn with Josiah in mind. Josiah is the ideal toward which all of Israel's history seemed to be heading. Before him there was no king like him, who turned to the Lord with all his heart and with all his soul and with all his might, according to all the law of Moses, nor did any like him arise after him, report 2 Kings 23:25, in a level of praise shown for no other biblical king. And again, regardless of how seriously you take the Bible and whether you value it as the Word of God, at least I've given you another perspective that at the very least serves to inform you why people like myself struggle to take the Bible seriously as a moral framework that's relevant in the 21st century. But just going back to this drama, I think it's safe to say that, as I said at the beginning, we've saved the best or the worst for last. This is a chilling glimpse into what the governing body really wants, which is total power. They only have so much power right now, as we're seeing in current events where the governing body have been named as defendants in 2 lawsuits that have been filed in the state of New York due to a window that legislation has provided to survivors of abuse so that they can get justice for what happened to them. The governing body lives in a world where they can be held accountable, but they would rather be living in a world where they are at the very top, where they are in Josiah's position, and they can crush any resistance to their authority by violence, by murder if necessary. This is what they would like, and this is why the Josiah drama was chosen, to emphasize and strengthen their authority in the minds of Jehovah's Witnesses. And it's an authority that reaches into so many areas of witnesses' lives, even to the extent where family relationships can be ripped apart. And is it any surprise that the governing body are so successful at doing that when we see the way anyone who questions the governing body is portrayed as scheming and malevolent and evil and threatening? It's no surprise at all that witnesses are terrified of apostates and want nothing to do even with sons or daughters, fathers or mothers, when this is the sort of propaganda that's being unleashed on them and is sculpting and moulding their minds. I've not seen at any other convention a drama that is this manipulative and this frankly sadistic in showing the true end game of Jehovah's Witness theology and the aspirations of the leaders. But those were my thoughts on the ironically titled Love Never Fails 2019 Convention of Jehovah's Witnesses. It's been a real marathon getting through these rebuttals, but hopefully you found my thoughts and insights of some interest. Don't forget to subscribe to the John Cedars channel for more such videos, and as always, thank you so much for watching.